So we're going to be solving the quadratic, we're going to be solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is going to be x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Now, for you to use the quadratic formula, we have to remember that it has to be in standard form. So that's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, the steps that we're going to use to solve is we're going to first find the discriminant. The discriminant is the b squared minus 4ac, so that is what's underneath the radical. Something to know about the discriminant is if your discriminant is greater than 0, you have two solutions. If your discriminant equals 0, you're going to only have one solution. And if your discriminant is less than 0, so any negative value, you're going to have no solution. So if you find out that your discriminant has a negative underneath the square root, you can automatically write there's no solutions there. After you find the discriminant, you're going to substitute your answer from step 1 underneath the radical and simplify. We're then going to substitute the a and b value from the original equation in the quadratic formula, and then we're going to simplify from there. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to first label. So I'm going to have A is 1, B, the B value is 12, and then the C value is 16. Okay, I'm going to first find the discriminant. So the discriminant is B squared minus 4 times A times C. So when I do this, I'm going to take B squared. So I'm going to take 12 squared minus 4 times my A value, which is 1, times 16. That's going to give me 144 minus 64, because negative 4 times 1 times 16 gives me negative 64. That's going to leave me with 80. I'm then going to go to step 2, and I'm going to substitute your answer from step 1 underneath the radical symbol and simplify. So I'm going to put that underneath the square root of 80. I'm going to simplify this radical. So I'm doing a part of the quadratic formula. I'm going to find out what the factors of 80, what is the greatest perfect square value I can take out of. So it would be the square root of 16 times the square root of 5. And I'm left with 4 square root 5. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my formula, my quadratic formula. So I'm going to do x equals the opposite of b. So my opposite of my b is my 12. So it's going to be a negative 12 plus or minus. I'm going to take my, I found my discriminant underneath the radical and it's already simplified. So I'm going to put 4 square root 5. Okay. All over 2 times a, because that's in my quadratic formula. So 2 times a, so 2 times 1 is 2. I'm then going to look at the negative 12, the 2, and the 4 and see if I can simplify further. So I can. They're all divisible by 2. So I'm going to be left with negative 6, and then 4 divided by 2 is 2, square root 5. So I got to make sure I put plus or minus. So this tells me that I have two solutions. My first solution is negative 6 plus 2 square root 5. My second solution is negative 6 minus 2 square root 5. You can write it either this way or this way. It doesn't matter. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to label my A, my B, and my C. So A is 2, B is 10, C is negative 15. I notice that it's in standard form, so I'm good to go. It always has to be equal to 0. I'm then going to find the discriminant. So this determines how many solutions I actually have. So I'm going to take 10 squared minus 4 times my A, which is 2, times my C, which is negative 15. I'm going to find my discriminant. So I have, this would be 100 plus, because negative 4 times 2 times negative 15 is going to give me 120. And that equals 220. I'm then going to go to the second step and put it underneath the radical and try to simplify. So I can simplify the greatest perfect square value to take out of 220 is 4 times 55. So I'm left with 2 square root 55. I'm now going to take this and add it into my formula. So I have x equals the opposite of b, which is going to be negative 10, plus or minus. Now, if that was a negative 10, the opposite of b would obviously be positive 10. So you just put 10 there. But in this case, we have the opposite of b is negative 10 because it's a positive 10 up here. Plus or minus, I'm going to put my radical in, 2 times the square root of 55 all over 2 times a. So 2 times 2, which is 4. I'm then going to break down. So I notice that they have 2 in common. So I'm going to take a 2 out of each. So negative 10, it's basically saying negative 10 fourths and 2 fourths. So I'm going to take out, they all have a 2 in common. So I'm going to take that out. So my final answer is going to be x equals, so it's going to be negative 5. I don't have to show the 2 anymore because 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I'm going to do plus or minus the square root of 55 over 4 divided by 2 is 2. So here is my answer. So I have 2 solutions because it's plus or minus. So that's how I could break it up if I want to, or I can leave it. Okay, again, we're going to list out our A, our B, and our C. My A is 2, my B is 2, my C is negative 1. I'm going to find my discriminant. So remember that's B squared minus 4AC. That tells us how many solutions we have. So I'm going to say B squared, which is 2 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 1. From there, 2 squared is 4. Negative 4 times 2 times negative 1 is going to give me a positive 8, and I'm left with 12. I'm going to take the second step, which I'm going to substitute your answer from step 1 underneath the radical and simplify. So I'm going to make it the square root of 12. I'm going to simplify, so the greatest perfect square value I can take out is 4, because 4 times 3 is 12. So I'm left with 2 square root 3. I'm going to take my answer and insert it into my quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b, so negative 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. I already figured what that is, so it's 2 square root 3 all over 2 times my a value, so 2 times 2 is 4. Okay. I look at these values and I notice they all have 2 in common, so I'm going to simplify. So I have x equals, this is going to end up being a negative 1 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1. I can either represent the 1 here or I don't have to, so I'm going to put the square root of 3. All over 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I'm left with this as my final answer. Okay, for number 4, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do A, B, and C. So my A is 1, my B is 3, and my C is going to be a negative 10. I'm going to do B squared minus 4AC, so that's my discriminant. That tells me how many solutions I have. So I have 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 10. That gives me 9 plus 40, and I get 49. I'm going to then try to put it underneath the radical and simplify. The square root of 49 is actually a perfect square value, so I'm just left with 7. So now I'm going to put that into my formula. So I have x equals, so it's the opposite of b. Notice it's a positive 3, so it's become a negative 3. Plus or minus, it's just going to be 7 because I don't have a radical anymore. All over 2 times a, which is 2 times 1, which is 2. So I can actually simplify this. So this would be x equals negative 3 plus 7 divided by 2, and x equals negative 3 minus 7 divided by 2. Negative 3 plus 7 is 4 divided by 2, so I get x equals 2. Negative 3 minus 7 is negative 10. Divided by 2, I get a negative 5. Now my last answer here is going to be, notice that it's not in standard form, so I have to move it first. So I have 3x squared plus 2x minus 4 equals 0. I'm then going to find out what a, b, and c are. So a is 3, b is 2, c is negative 4. I'm going to find the discriminant. So I have b squared, which is 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 4. I have 4. Negative 4 times 3 times negative 4. That's going to give me a positive 48. I'm then going to get 52. I'm going to try to simplify the radical of 52, which I can take out a 4 and a 13. Square root of 4 is 2, square root 13. I'm going to now take this and add it into my formula. So I have x equals the opposite of b. So opposite of b is 2 or negative 2 plus or minus 2 square root 13, because I'm going to add that into the discriminant part of my quadratic formula, and put it all over 2 times a, which is 2 times 3, which is 6. 2, negative 2, 6, and 2 all have 2 in common. So I'm going to be left with x equals negative 1 plus or minus. I don't have to include the 2 here. I can just leave it the square root of 13 all over 6 divided by 2, which is 3.